Greetings everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. To the elite members, thank you so much for your continued love and dedication to the channel and myself. I never have any words to express how grateful I truly am. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. So sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Stories Subscriber Edition Part 1. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. Right after the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Oh, and one more thing. This video is a montage of different genres. I will read out the genre right before I read the story, and if it is not your thing, there are chapter markers in the description. Let's get started, shall we? Disappearances. The bizarre disappearance of Marshall Iwasa. His burned truck turned up nearly 700 miles away from his last known location. Destroyed truck, no sign of missing man. On November 17, 2019, 26-year-old Marshall Iwasa spent time at his mother's home in Lethbridge before departing that night, explaining that he was going to pick up something from his storage unit nearby and then return to his house in Calgary. This would be the last time anyone heard from him. Days later, his burned truck and scattered belongings were discovered by hikers in a remote area of Pemberton, British Columbia, approximately 700 miles away from Marshall's last known location. No CCTV footage captured any part of his journey from Lethbridge to Pemberton. No one came forward to report having seen him at any stores or gas stations along the way. Nor was there any evidence to prove that he was even the one who made that journey. Many aspects of his case continue to defy explanation, and several years later, his family is still fighting for answers. What happened to Marshall Iwasa? Marshall Iwasa. The youngest of two children, Marshall Iwasa was born on January 3, 1993, in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. To parents, Tammy and Perry. His parents divorced when he was a child. After this, Perry ceased to be an active parent of his children's lives, so Tammy raised them as a single mother. Described as a gentle, reserved, and kind, Marshall enjoyed camping, hiking, bodybuilding, and sports. He worked in construction and other manual labor jobs. He had a small group of close friends, some of whom he'd known since childhood. He was also very close to his sister, Paige. Paige and Marshall are best friends, said Tammy. Their bond is unreal. However, Marshall was also said to be a very private person. He didn't always feel comfortable with talking about himself and what was going on in his life, especially when it came to school. He'd moved to Calgary, where he attended the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, or SAIT, and studied software development. While it was assumed by his family that he'd stick with it and eventually graduate from college, he sometimes alluded to having a different vision for his future. He would say things like, "In my field, sometimes you don't need the degree. It's just kind of like who you know and your experience," remembered Paige. In the weeks and months leading up to his disappearance, those closest to him noticed that he seemed to be experiencing stress and thought it was simply due to school. Otherwise, he appeared to be his normal self. No other major stresses other than that we thought was stress related to school, said Paige. Marshall's last visit. Marshall went over to Tammy's house in Lethbridge on November 17, 2019. He visited with her and also assisted her with a computer issue she'd been having. She told him that he was welcome to spend the night since it was so late, but he explained that he needed to grab some computer equipment from the storage unit nearby that he shared with Paige. From there, he planned to drive back to his house in Calgary. "We have so much different stuff in there. It's kind of like a mishmash of his stuff and mine," Paige said about their storage unit. "I have mostly like books and family items, and he kept extra household items that he had, camping stuff, tools, and the such. We had a bunch of Christmas ornaments in there as well." He left his mother's home at around 11 p.m., marking the final time anyone in his family saw Marshall Iwasa. Truck discovered by hikers. Paige and Tammy were unaware that anything was wrong. It wasn't uncommon to go days without no contact from Marshall, and both assumed that he was safely back in Calgary. Tammy traveled to Hawaii to see Paige, who now lived there. On November 23rd, a group of hikers found a burned-out truck near the trail that led to the Brian Waddington hut in Pemberton, which is where the group was heading. The area was remote, wooded, and difficult to reach. On the ground near the GMC Sierra were various scattered items: cell phones, gaming consoles, Marshall's expired passport, a cooler with the name Cody Lewis on it, and clothes. Side note: it has never been determined who the Cody Lewis in question is or why his cooler would be there. Furthermore, it appeared that the vehicle had been stripped. It was missing parts like the steering column. Deeply unsettled by their discovery, the hikers photographed the scene and contacted law enforcement. "It felt like a crime scene and had a very eerie feeling," said James Stark, one of the hikers. Items missing and moved. The RCMP struggled to reach the area, damaging one of their vehicles in the process. It ultimately took them 2 days to get there. When they finally did, they photographed the scene as well. When a comparison was made between their own photos and those taken by the hikers, it was obvious that someone had been there in those 2 days. Items had been moved, and in some cases, organized. For example, the cell phones were now laying side by side each other. It was also said that some items were missing. Additionally, as the items hadn't been burned, it appeared that they must have been removed from the truck before the fire occurred. They took note of Marshall Iwasa's expired passport and reached out to his family, hoping that they might know where he is. Neither Paige nor Tammy had any idea, though. When they were unable to find him themselves, they officially reported him missing. The gaming consoles were determined not to belong to Marshall, as he was still at his house in Calgary. Belongings of his that have never been found: his contact lenses in solution, current cell phone, a Samsung Galaxy S6, a laptop, Mountain hardware backpack, and wallet. The discarded cell phones at the site were confirmed to be old phones of Marshall's. According to his family, he'd sometimes let his phone plans expire and just get a new phone instead. Puzzled, authorities began trying to reconstruct what happened in the days between the last sighting of Marshall and when his truck turned up. They started with the storage unit in Lethbridge. They learned that the code for the unit had been used several times without success on the morning of November 18th. He finally gained access at 6 a.m. and stayed at the storage unit until 8:30 a.m. However, the surveillance footage from the morning was no longer available by the time law enforcement requested it. As far as Paige could tell, nothing was actually missing from the storage unit, and it's unclear what Marshall might have taken, if anything. Yet, he must have gone there for some reason. Marshall's movements from there are a mystery. He had no known connection to Pemberton. Neither he nor his truck showed up on CCTV footage at any location in those 700 miles, which further confused investigators. Additionally, He wasn't registered to stay at the hut near which his destroyed truck was found. In fact, no one aside from the hikers were registered during that time. Marshall's secret. The investigation revealed that Marshall hadn't gone back to SAIT, unbeknownst to his family. He had dropped out of college before the fall semester began. A few of his friends were aware of this fact, but stated that he refused to share the reason with them. As it turned out, Marshall had been placed on academic probation, which is now presumed to be the reason, or at least one of them, while he ultimately made the choice to leave school. The revelation was a shock to his family. They were supportive of him in whatever he did, they said, and would have been fine with him deciding to leave school. They couldn't understand why he hadn't told them. He also renewed the phone plan for his current cell phone, although this was less concerning to his family, as he'd done this with several other phones. Search efforts. Law enforcement combed the area in and around where Marshall's GMC Sierra was located. They brought in cadaver dogs as well, but failed to find any signs of Marshall or any indication that a body was present in the site or anywhere in the area. Marshall's cousin Jackie said this: "We're still trying to understand where he is and what happened, and all we know is that his truck is in Pemberton. We just have no clues or sightings since he was seen in Lethbridge." Authorities suspected that the missing man was no longer alive. They noted that there had been no activity on his bank account or credit card since November 15th, 2 days before he was last seen. They were surprised to learn that he hadn't purchased gas using his cards at any point during the 700-mile trip from Lethbridge and Pemberton. They have gotten a little bit more to his financial records and did not find any occurrence of him filling up gas, said Page. That itself is suspicious. It was also confirmed by the Border Patrol that Marshall Iwasa hadn't crossed the border and entered the United States. Investigators believe that the most likely explanation was that Marshall had chosen to end his own life, yet there was no solid evidence for this. Conversely, his loved ones felt that the circumstances were more indicative of foul play than anything else. This case needs to be pushed into criminal, asserted Page. I will not be okay with this until we have answers, and I won't stop until we do. Authorities declined to perform a fire investigation due to their assumption that no foul play had occurred. So the Iwasa family hired a private fire investigator who concluded that the fire was the result of arson and that an accelerant had been used. There was also the question of why the truck had been stripped for parts and how whomever did this made it out of such a remote area with no vehicle and without being noticed by any eyewitnesses. Was this person, whether it was Marshall or someone else, picked up by someone? Additionally, those who knew him didn't believe that he'd choose to torch his own truck, a vehicle he loved and had fully paid off. Eyewitness account ties Marshall's case to another mysterious disappearance. Daniel Riach, a 29-year-old Squamish First Nations man, vanished under mysterious circumstances in November of 2019 as well. He was taken into custody on November 25th after he was found wandering along a rural road in frigid weather. Some sources say he was intoxicated. However, they had no reason to hold him, so they ultimately released him. He was last spotted walking along another rural road at night. It's unclear where his vehicle was at this time or why he'd been walking. In the early morning hours of November 26th, Daniel's car was found abandoned in Squamish, near his residence. The vehicle was still running, the passenger side door was open, and his cell phone was still inside. The location is approximately 55 miles away from where Marshall's burned truck was discovered. There was no sign of Daniel himself anywhere, and to this day, he has never been found. His case is still unsolved. In a bizarre twist, an eyewitness came forward claiming to have seen Daniel and Marshall at a bar together in Squamish in November of 2019, just before both went missing. It was the same bar, that Irish place, where Daniel's guitar was found during the search for him, adding credence to their story. According to the witness, Daniel and Marshall were in the company of a third, unidentified man. They overheard Daniel say that he was afraid this man was going to kill them that night. The story, while unsettling, has never been verified, nor has a connection between these two cases ever been officially established. Current state of the investigation. The BC RCMP reportedly did not test the items found at the scene for DNA, explaining that they do not have reasonable grounds to believe a DNA-designated criminal offense was committed in this case. In 2020, the Lethbridge police said that no usable prints were found on the truck or on any of the items recovered at the scene. They went on to say, in examining Iwasa's personal affairs in the months leading up to his disappearance, including interviews with close friends as well as his financial, medical, and social media activity, there is evidence to suggest he was experiencing stress in his life and had been withdrawn. Furthermore, they said there is no credible, corroborated, or compelling information to suggest foul play, or that the occurrence is criminal in nature. However, they reassured the public that they were still following up on leads and tips. Marshall Iwasa's case remains open and unsolved. No significant updates have been announced by law enforcement since 2020. His loved ones are still deeply committed to finding out what happened to him and have hired private investigators to help them. They still believe that the foul play theory should at least be explored, as there is no clear evidence that Marshall ended his own life. There is a Facebook group dedicated to his case. If you have any information regarding Marshall's disappearance, you are encouraged to contact the Lethbridge Police Service at 403-328-4444 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Halloween. The early 1980s were a wild time to be a crime reporter in Southeast Florida. I moved down from South Carolina in the spring of 1980, nearly doubling my salary from $17,000 to $31,000 a year, a fortune for an entry-level reporter back then. I wasn't even working for one of the major Miami papers. I was with a smaller, hyper-local publication, the Pinecrest Pioneer. In journalism, there's a grim saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Our paper's circulation had been climbing ever since Miami's drug-fueled violence began spilling into the suburbs. The stories were gruesome. Gang reprisals, random killings, even bombings. That's why my salary was so high. But after covering these horrors for a while, you start to notice their corrosive effect on society. It's as if something toxic sleeps in the water supply or infects the collective consciousness. For a time, it felt like half of Pinecrest was up to no good. For me, the closest example of this was the biggest story I ever wrote. On Saturday, October 31st, 1981, a wealthy boat salesman on Marissa Drive allowed his 17-year-old daughter to throw a Halloween costume party in their backyard. She invited all of her friends, and they had the time of their lives. Around midnight, the salesman pulled the plug, politely calling time on the festivities. Everyone filed out into the streets, and slowly but surely, all the girls' friends made their way home, safely, except one. The next morning, the parents of a girl named Christine Parks reported her missing to the Miami-Dade Police Department. The prognosis was grim. The houses on Marisa Drive and surrounding streets are all built along artificial canals, allowing homeowners to dock boats in their backyards. Police theorized that Christine, possibly intoxicated after some guests snuck alcohol into the party, wandered off, fell into the canal and drowned. Some doubted this, noting no one heard yelling or splashing, but the police dragged the canal for remains to rule it out. They found nothing. 3 days into the search, with law enforcement growing desperate, a trucker driving past the lake at the top of South Dixie Highway spotted a half-naked girl staggering from a patch of trees. He stopped, covered her with his jacket, and asked what she was doing alone in such a state. She seemed drunk, unable to recall where she was or how she got there. The only thing she remembered was her name, Christine Parks. Christine's family was overjoyed at her return, but she wasn't unharmed. A medical examination revealed she had been drugged, abducted, and brutally assaulted over the next 48 hours. Instead of killing her, her abductors drugged her one final time and dumped her in a wooded area along South Dixie Highway. While under the drug's residual effects, Christine remained relatively calm, but once sober, the trauma overwhelmed her. She suffered a nervous breakdown, withdrew from school, stopped seeing friends, and despite aggressive medication and therapy, remained emotionally and mentally scarred by the horrors she glimpsed through the haze of her memory. The investigation into her attackers quickly stalled, sparking fear and outrage among Pinecrest citizens. None were more vocal than the boat salesman, whom I'll call Mr. Stone to avoid potential lawsuits. He's still reportedly litigious. Stone offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the culprit's capture and even proposed hiring a private investigator, though Christine's family declined. He remained publicly outspoken, even erecting a billboard outside his showroom begging for information. In spring of 1982, at a charity auction, Stone suggested I investigate the case, offering his full cooperation in hopes my reporting would help catch Christine's abductors. I couldn't work the case full-time due to other assignments, but my editor gave me permission to pursue it whenever possible. My first dibs on publishing. The police hadn't arrested anyone, but had questioned a few suspects. The first was a young man that Christine had briefly dated, who reacted poorly to their breakup. He was at the party, but was cleared due to alibis. The second was a security guard hired by Stone to keep partygoers away from the canal. The guard said Christine approached him, showing signs of intoxication. Fearing alcohol had been smuggled in, it had, by the way, he informed Stone, who told him to find and confiscate it. When the guard returned, Christine was gone. He assumed she blended into the crowd and didn't see her again, until learning she was missing. The third suspect, considered the prime suspect for the time, was an ex-con named Frank Jeffers, squatting in a half-built home on the affluent MTA Island. Jeffers, who used a small boat to commit petty theft and vandalism in wealthy neighborhoods, had a prior conviction for abducting a 14-year-old girl 20 years earlier. He served 16 years for aggravated kidnapping. Stone had directed police attention to Jeffers, whose alibis for the night of Christine's abduction were shaky. However, lack of evidence prevented his arrest. When police later attempted to arrest him for a break-in at a boating goods store, Jeffers fired on them with a .45 caliber handgun. The police returned fire, killing him instantly. After Jeffers' death, I spoke with Stone, who expressed regret that the prime suspect wouldn't face justice, but felt there were more worse outcomes. Having covered serious crimes for 5 years, I agreed. Child predators often reoffend, and Jeffers' death, while not ideal, brought relief to Pinecrest. I thought my article was nearly complete, but loose ends began unraveling the story. Jeffers had 2 alibis for the night of the abduction. He either traveled by boat or on foot. That night, he claimed he was drunk, singing loudly past a neighbor's house. The neighbor confirmed seeing him, but later changed his story, saying he only heard someone he assumed was Jeffers. This discrepancy raised suspicions. The second alibi came from security footage at a bar near Cape Florida Beach called Buddy's. The bar's owner provided the footage, but police deemed it too unclear to confirm Jeffers' identity and refused to return the tape. When I visited the bar, the owner showed me the original footage. Despite the grainy 1982 quality, Jeffers' distinctive appearance, bright clothes, wife beater, swim shorts, sandals, and bleached blonde hair was unmistakable. I was confident anyone who knew him could identify him. I contacted a cop involved with the investigation, who said a hotshot attorney recommended by Stone had deemed the footage unusable due to the lack of clear facial features. This seemed like a mistake. When I approached Stone, he dismissed my concerns, insisting I trust his attorney's judgment. When I suggested Jeffers might not be the culprit, Stone snapped, accusing me of exploiting a tragedy for my career. He hung up after I urged him to view the footage himself. Stone's words about causing more pain haunted me. I wondered if my motives were selfish or if exposing the truth would bring real justice to Christine's family. Determined to explore every lead, I contacted Christine's parents. Despite her fragile state, her father, Patrick, allowed me to speak with her. Christine revealed a detail absent from police reports. One of her attackers smelled of cinnamon. She was certain it was on his breath, not an ambient scent. She had mentioned this to police multiple times, but it was omitted from reports. Then I learned Stone had a son, Junior, a 19-year-old with learning difficulties who was rarely seen outside the family home. 2 partygoers recalled seeing an older boy, not in costume, talking to the security guard, the last person to see Christine. The police, however, claimed Junior was in his room all night, based solely on Stone's word. When I tried to speak with Junior, Stone hung up on me. By summer of 1982, with Stone uncooperative and the police losing patience, I had to shelf the investigation. I focused on other assignments, but the case haunted me. On November 1st, 1982, at a grocery store, I ran into Stone's housekeeper, Anissa, buying discounted Halloween candy, specifically atomic fireballs. She mentioned they were for Junior, who loved them. It hit me. Atomic fireballs are cinnamon flavored. Christine had smelled cinnamon on her attacker's breath. Junior, who was at the party and lived in a secluded room, could have been involved. Stone, with his wealth and influence, could have facilitated or covered up the crime. I pitched the story to my editor, who was initially supportive, believing we could publish it carefully to avoid lawsuits. But days later, Stone bought a $100,000 24-month advertising deal with the paper, including full-page ads for his boat's showroom. My editor informed me the story was dead. Stone's influence ensured it would never run. Defeated, I chose survival over risking my job or safety. I once saw an old black and white movie where the character said, "That's the way the world works, kid. Always has, always will." As a young reporter, I didn't believe it, but after this, I realized it was true. The powerful protect their own, and just as often takes a back seat. Mythology. This isn't something I would normally post, and I hope I don't regret sharing it. I saw someone briefly mentioned a subreddit in a YouTube video, and thought it would be the perfect place to share a horrific experience I've never told anyone. I'm not sure if anyone will see this, but I'm sharing in hopes that it will inspire someone to stay safer than I was. Out of consideration for others, I want to include a trigger warning. I will be briefly mentioning assault with as few details as possible. 1 year ago, around this time, I was bored and scrolling the web. Nothing unusual for me. When I decided to go on Omegle. Omegle was a now shuttered website that allowed you to talk to strangers via video or text chat. It had been around for a long time, and I used it frequently when I was younger as a time waster. Sure, there were plenty of creeps, but I had an equal number of pleasant interactions and conversations. On Omegle, you could type in tags, keywords describing the type of conversation or person you're looking for, and you'd match with someone using the same ones. I always used alt or alternative, as it seemed to weed out rude people and connect me with others closer to my age. For reference, I was 19 at the time. I connected with someone who called himself Kane, and we started chatting via text. He said he was 23, and I shared my age. We exchanged small talk, and before I knew it, we were talking all night, until 6 a.m. We lived in the same time zone and discussed philosophy, life, and our interests. He was entertaining, and I was having fun. When we talked about our general locations, he abruptly suggested, "We should meet up sometime." I laughed, but he was serious. It turned out we lived only 3 to 4 hours apart, so he was genuinely considering it. I'm an anxiety-ridden person, but for some reason, I thought this might be normal since we'd spent hours talking without any red flags. I said, "Sure, why the hell not?" I know this was an incredibly stupid mistake. I have a big heart and often give others the benefit of the doubt. So, just like that, we started planning a camping trip. He was set on doing it just days later because that's when he was next off work. I agreed since I had nothing else going on. I asked for his number to discuss the trip off Omegle, and he gave it to me. When I texted, I noticed the messages showed green, indicating he was using a Samsung or Android phone. Teasingly, I said something like, "What's up with the Samsung?" After a few minutes, he replied that he had 2 phones, one for work. That was the first red flag. Why would a 23-year-old need 2 phones for work? There could be legitimate reasons, but it triggered an intuitive unease I regret not listening to. I asked about his job, and he said he worked for the state, adding that he couldn't share details because he'd signed papers prohibiting it and could get fired. I was wary, but figured he might work for a police station, town council, or something in law enforcement, and I was probably overthinking it. As the camping trip approached, he wanted to go to Needham Mountain in New York. Don't worry, this isn't near my home, and I don't care about protecting his fake identity after what he did. I researched the location and found articles about the soil on Needham Mountain being contaminated with arsenic due to old mines. Government and state resources said it was still safe to hike if you washed your skin and shoes afterwards. Still, I felt uneasy and texted Kane, asking why we were going somewhere potentially dangerous. He assured me nothing would happen, saying he and his friends frequently camped there. This slightly reassured me since he knew the area better than I did. My parents are understandably protective and strict. I told them I was meeting a friend I'd known for a month from a video game, knowing this would worry them less than the truth. They thought it was a terrible idea, but eventually let me go. When Kane pulled into my driveway, he didn't come inside and waited by his car. After a brief introduction, my mom rushed out to ask him about the area we were headed to, and then we were off. We stopped at a Starbucks near my house so he could get coffee, as he was tired from the drive. We sat in his car for about an hour and a half, where he asked me to rate his playlist and show me a notebook where he wrote down every song he liked. I thought it was odd, but kind of sweet. Who writes down songs like that anymore? After an hour, I said we should get to the campsite before dark. He kept saying, just 5 more minutes. And after 30 minutes of insisting, he finally agreed to drive. During the 4-hour drive to Needham Mountain, Kane mostly talked about himself, long stories about his friends and an ex-girlfriend he didn't like. I found it strange to talk about another woman like that. After 2 hours, I tried to shift to a lighter topic, asking about his hobbies. He said eating healthy was important and called people who eat junk food stupid. He said he only wore sustainable cotton or wool clothing. I don't mind sustainability, but his tone was obnoxious. Then he asked me, "What brought you to Omegle?" I said I was bored and liked meeting interesting people. He nodded slowly, grinned, and said he liked going on Omegle to tell people he was a soldier in Russia, torturing people as he spoke. I sat in silence, waiting for him to say that it was a joke, but he just laughed and said, "What?" As we neared the campsite, I mentioned I was hungry. He suggested stopping at Whole Foods. I sighed internally, expecting him to judge my food choices, but I was hungry, so I agreed. At Whole Foods, he made me pay for both our meals because his card wouldn't work. This annoyed me, but I was eager to get to the campsite, so I paid. We ate outside, and after an hour, we finally drove up the mountain. He pulled into a small parking area with 3 spots, where older men were smoking weed. It wasn't wrong, but made me uncomfortable, especially so late at night. Before I could say anything, Kane said it was too cold to carry our supplies to the campsite, a 10-minute walk, and set up a camp. I was taken aback and said, "What do you mean? I'll help you. We didn't come here for nothing, right?" He insisted it was too cold and told me to feel how cold it was outside. I didn't want to face the men in the parking lot, so I rolled down the window halfway and stuck my hand out. It was freezing, in the 30s with harsh wind chill. Annoyed but agreeing to sleep in the car, I was disappointed our trip was wasted. He sat in silence, seemingly uncomfortable with my annoyance and unsure how to comfort me. I slinked back into the passenger seat, scrolling on social media to pass the time. Suddenly, he grabbed my phone and said, "Come here," patting his lap. Confused and already annoyed, I said, "You're funny," and reached for my phone, which he tossed onto the car floor. Before I could grab it, he scooped me up, tossed me into the back seat and assaulted me. I don't remember most of it. My eyes were squeezed shut, praying for it to end. Afterward, he pushed me back into the seats, got dressed, smiled, and said, "I was it." I stared back, tears in my eyes. He climbed into the front seat, propped his feet up on the wheel, and went to sleep. I sat motionless in the back seat for about 2 hours, trying to process what had happened. I considered calling my mom or 911, but hesitated. I'd been assaulted once before, and it broke my parents' hearts. I knew this would destroy them, and I feared my dad or brother might seek vengeance and end up in jail. I sat there all night, watching the men outside stare into the car and smoke. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to wind hitting the car, curled in a fetal position. Kane noticed I was awake and said it was time to go. Terrified, my heart raced as I scanned the back seat for a weapon, settling on my metal water bottle. It wasn't deadly, but holding it made me feel safer. I stayed in the back as Kane drove. When I asked where we were going, he said, "To get breakfast," as if it was obvious. We pulled into a parking garage where he told me to get out. I clung to the car, not wanting him behind me. I considered running, but feared being chased. We went to a Mexican restaurant where he told me to order pancakes so he could have some. This angered me further, but I stayed silent, afraid of the consequences. I ate a few bites, and he happily finished my plate, paying quickly with cash. Back in the car, he lay in the back seat to nap, saying he hadn't slept well. I let him sleep, baffled by how he could rest so soundly after what he had done. For 3 hours, I watched YouTube videos to calm myself. Around 9 a.m., my mom texted, insisting I come home. I told her Kane was napping, but I'd be home soon. She didn't like that and demanded I return immediately. I woke Kane, who got angry, saying, "Don't wake me up next time. Play on your phone or watch TikTok or something." Shaking, I said my mom wanted me home. He demanded 30 more minutes and told me to set a timer. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. When the timer went off, I filmed myself waking him, afraid of his reaction. He was angry again, and when I begged to leave, he refused. I put on a playful facade and said, "Okay, I'll just get an Uber then." As I opened the car door, he grabbed my shoulder, digging his fingers in, and yanked me back. I nearly blacked out from fear. He demanded, "Where do you think you're going?" I said my mom would call the police if I wasn't home soon, mentioning my dad's law enforcement job to make it believable. At the mention of police, his expression changed, and he frantically agreed to drive me home. I felt profound relief as he started the 5-hour drive back. The drive was quieter than the trip up. I gripped my phone, avoiding eye contact, wondering if he felt remorse. When we reached my town at around 11:30 p.m., flashing lights appeared behind us. My dad is a cop, so I'm cautious about traffic laws, and I was scared. 2 officers approached, and I rolled down my window so they'd see my familiar face, the daughter of their boss. They looked concerned and disappointed. One officer told Kane to get out while I explained why we were out so late, sparing the horrific details. I was tired, scared, and needed to be home. I didn't want to wake my dad with such news. I overheard the second officer ask Kane's name. He mumbled, then gave a name that wasn't Kane, and said he was 22, not 23. My heart sank. The officers explained he'd missed a stop sign and let him off with a warning, telling me to get home. When he pulled off, I let my emotions out, screaming, "Why did you lie to me? What is wrong with you?" He looked distressed by my volume, telling me to calm down and saying he lied about his identity for his own safety. That baffled me after what he'd done. I screamed at him all the way to my house. When we arrived, I threw open the car door, tossed my stuff onto the lawn, and yelled at him to get away, saying I never wanted to see him again. I held my belongings into my room while my parents slept, unaware of my secret. I woke my mom to say I was home, then broke down in my room, sobbing silently as the reality sank in. My phone lit up with a text from Kane saying, "I'm sorry about what happened, I really am. If it makes you feel any better, I just got pulled over, so that's my karma, I guess. Let me know if you want to talk." Nausea hit me like a train. I screenshotted the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact. I haven't heard from him since, and haven't hung out with anyone except my boyfriend, whom I met later and is, thankfully, normal. I think about what happened almost every day and feel sick when strangers get close, even in a grocery store. I know my irrational teenage actions contributed to this, but I shouldn't have met someone I didn't know. I had faith he'd be somewhat normal, but I wish I'd listened to my instincts and my parents' warnings. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't made up the police story, and I don't want to think about it. I'll never meet a stranger again. While coping, I Googled Nimham Mountain and found a link for Cane Mountain North Trail Loop, New York. If you've listened this far, please take this away. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it normally, probably, always is. National Parks. A few years ago, from June to July, I lived next to two national parks when a horrific wildfire swept through our area, prompting evacuations that included both parks. My family had about 3 hours to pack everything of value. Fortunately, we didn't end up having to evacuate, but the entire situation was chaotic, stressful, and dangerous, causing significant damage. I had just gotten off work, as had my father, when I urged my family to consider evacuating. At first, they didn't consider taking my advice seriously, but when they saw the mountainside engulfed in flames, literally the entire face of the mountain burning, it was like something out of a nightmare. Trees erupted in flames and fell into the inferno just a few miles from our home. The fires moved slowly downhill, but with so much already burned, it was only a matter of time before they reached the valley. Displaced animals ran through the streets, some of the wildest scenes I've ever witnessed. The first thing I did was gather all of our legal documents, which took about a half an hour. Next, I secured family photos and other sentimental paper items. You don't realize what's truly valuable until you're forced to choose what to save. Suddenly, everything you own feels significant. Then, I helped my 8-year-old sister pack while she struggled with panic attacks. It was heart-wrenching to tell her she couldn't take all of her stuffed animals, only a few. I convinced her to pack clothes and hygiene items as well, but she was so distraught that I ended up packing most of her things for her. She finally settled on a few items, including an elephant stuffed animal she'd gotten from an ambulance when she was 4. My other sister, oddly calm, had packed everything she wanted into a small bag. Looking back, I think she was in shock, almost like a soldier in a war zone. Her eyes were glazed over, and she didn't react when she looked at the fire. I think she was overwhelmed, emotionally shut down until the crisis passed. When I went to help my parents, They told me to focus on packing my own things. I packed some expensive items, like my purse collection, as well as important documents and my artwork. The stress was overwhelming. I was on the top floor, overheating, and had a full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating and sweating with my heart pounding. I realized how many of us were under one roof, animals included, and how we could all be in danger. It felt like my first existential crisis, and it put everything into perspective. Next, we packed supplies for our animals: 12 hens, 2 guinea pigs, and 2 dogs. We gathered food, harnesses, water bottles, bedding, hay, everything we might need for a few days. If we were evacuated for longer, we'd have to restock on the road. By now, the fire was halfway down the mountain, still miles away but creeping closer, one stubborn inch at a time. I grabbed the guinea pigs, placed them in their own transport cage, and set them by the door. My dad borrowed a trailer from his boss, but I wasn't allowed to help load anything outside due to my life-threatening asthma. The smoke would have been dangerous for me. Instead, I could only watch from the window as the mountain burned, while my parents struggled to load the animals. By nighttime, we had everything moved and ready. The fire had reached the base of the mountain, on one side, a sliver away from igniting the national park just west of us. Exhausted, we didn't have the energy to get into the truck. I asked my parents if we could leave, but they wanted to wait to see if the fire would be contained or change direction. It felt hopeless, but they were adamant, having weathered fires before and knowing the protocols. Most of our neighbors, rural farmers, ranchers, and homesteaders, had already left. My sisters and I watched their trucks and trailers caravan away on the main road, one by one, even into the evening. That night, my sisters and I slept by the front door, passing out from exhaustion. I vaguely remember hearing the doorknob jingle while half asleep, but as a kid, I dismissed it as a dream. The fire was mesmerizing, lighting up the sky at midnight with orange flames, purple smoke, and moonlight. It was eerie, haunting, and almost beautiful, like a painting. Around 2 a.m., I fell asleep again, watching the fire creep closer. I woke up early, around 6 a.m., to find the mountain still burning, but the 1,000-foot flames were gone. I woke everyone, and we were overwhelmed with relief. Some of us cried from joy. Fire teams had cut a tremendous fire line overnight, and helicopters and planes dropped water constantly. Several local fire departments worked together to contain the blaze, saving our area. Thankfully, no one died, though one firefighter was severely burned. He has since recovered and is attending physical therapy, released from the hospital a month or 2 ago. The night before, while we prepared for evacuation, a bucket helicopter had crashed, but fortunately, no one was killed. In total, 1 house, several government buildings, and 35 acres were burned. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The scariest part, however, came the next day, and it had nothing to do with the fire. As we unpacked the trucks and checked on the animals, my parents noticed something disturbing. Someone had gotten into their truck overnight. Items were missing from the glove box and center console. I thought they might have been misplaced in the chaos, and they accepted my logic, but kept an eye out. Later, my sister said she saw the neighbors had returned, but when I checked, their driveway was empty. She insisted she'd seen someone walking around their property. That struck me as odd since I hadn't seen any vehicles return. At sunset, we decided to call it a day and make dinner. When we went inside, we noticed the back door was wide open. My mom told my sister and me to close it, thinking we had left it ajar, but we hadn't used it all day. In the back room, our laundry room, we found a tall, dirty man with dark, beady eyes and the beginnings of a beard, rifling through our things. He smiled, possibly even winked, when he saw us, sending us screaming back into the main house. He darted out the back door and into the woods. My dad chased after him with a loaded gun, but didn't catch him. I was the only one who got a good look at him. It turned out he was likely a hermit, homeless person, or opportunist robbing houses during the evacuation. A genius but despicable plan, knowing homes would be empty. For some reason, he targeted our house in broad daylight while we were there. The police later told us he was a violent man who had killed pets at nearby properties, cats and fish left behind by owners who thought they'd be safe for a few days. Had we stumbled upon him alone, he might have harmed us. Disturbingly, when we caught him, he was rummaging through our dirty clothes hamper, possibly looking for underwear. As a middle-aged man targeting a house with children, this was chilling. I share this story not to scare you, but to warn you. Never leave your belongings unattended or unlocked during an evacuation. Professional thieves target these situations, and I didn't realize the danger until I encountered one. Here's some context before I get started. I'm a 26-year-old male. The incident occurred a week ago in Cologne, where I was invited by my friend and business colleague. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I was on my way home and sat down at the bus stop to wait. I was alone there, except for a girl sitting on the other side of the bus stop. It was almost empty. At first, I didn't pay any attention to her and was busy texting my friends. However, several minutes passed and the bus still did not arrive. During that time, I put my phone aside, and that's when I began to notice some obvious oddities, to the point of feeling very uncomfortable. The girl looked to be about 30 years old, thin, dressed in a black dress and long black boots, with a hat lying next to her seat. What confused me a little was her unnaturally, unhealthily pale skin, especially on her face. It was probably just makeup or something like that. And her bags under her eyes were outlined in black. Nothing unusual. I've seen many people with informal styles and appearances. But her eyes were so empty, lifeless, glassy. However, what really scared me was the way she looked at me, with obvious aggression, predatory, like a python looking at a mouse. At the same time, she smiled weirdly and disgustingly, sometimes licking her lips and quietly humming some melody. And this went on for more than 10 minutes, non-stop. Never in my life have I felt such confusion and discomfort as I did at that moment. I just wanted to run away, but at the same time, I didn't want to look like an idiot, especially since I had waited so long. I understand how silly this sounds from the outside, but I simply cannot describe how repulsive and frightening she looked at me. Her face was so scary at that moment. I just knew that something was wrong, and my instincts and intuition were screaming that this was not normal, that this should not be happening. In addition to what I saw, I just felt in my gut that this would not lead to anything good. Eye contact was unrelenting. She was still looking at me, and I was trying to look away, at my watch or phone, and so on. I felt very uncomfortable, but I tried to be friendly, greeted her, waved awkwardly, but she continued to stare silently. Then the situation began to deteriorate rapidly, and her behavior became more hostile. From passive aggression, she moved on to open aggression. She began to breathe heavily, grinding her teeth and squeak. Then my patience snapped. I stood up and shouted at her, "Please, stop!" I kept my distance and didn't go near her, because I realized that she was probably on drugs or had mental health issues. At that moment, she seemed to fall silent and spoke for the first time, muttering, "I'm sorry." At that moment, I felt a little calmer, and she even stopped staring at me. I texted my friends that I was still out and would be a bit late getting home, and just then my heart skipped a beat. She let out a loud cry, like a scream. The girl jumped up from her seat and started coming toward me, muttering some weird stuff in German, I think. I was confused and gradually, step by step, prepared to retreat, until the girl suddenly started chasing me and running towards me. This crazy clung to me with her long, sharp nails, drawing blood and trying to bite me several times, tearing my shirt at the shoulders. I had no choice but to hit her between the ears, as it was a matter of my safety, health, and possibly even my life. After that, I pushed her aside, and in a few minutes managed to run to a small shop where there were some people. I briefly told them what had happened to me, and they told me to call 110, which I did. My scratches on my arm were successfully treated by a local worker, for which I am very grateful to him. Later, I went to the police station and showed them my injuries and scars on my arm. I told them about the incident, and they suggested that I file a report in order to bring the attacker to justice. However, I refused to do so because I was due to return to my homeland in 3 days, and simply did not have time for all the red tape. I still don't know who this lunatic was or what motivated her. But here's my banal lesson. Never underestimate the number of crazy people around you, especially when it comes to big cities, and if you are alone. I am a grown man, and was able to stand up for myself. But imagine if a child or an elderly person had found themselves in the same situation. I'm afraid to imagine what would have happened next. This is not the worst or scariest thing that could happen in life, but it was so damn crazy and frighteningly absurd. P.S. And yes, fuck public transport. After this, I will always use a taxi when I'm abroad again. So to the crazy girl who almost killed me, let's never meet again. And that, dear listeners, brings these True Creepy Stories Subscriber Edition Part 1 stories to a close. I would like to take this moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership of BackToAshes. Thank you so much for your remaining dedicated support. As I always like to say, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a voice and this channel would not exist. So thank you for all that you do. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these collections. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.